There's a novel by Voltaire called Candide, written a couple of hundred years ago, in which there's a character called Professor Pangloss. Now, Candide is a very simple story, quite short story, about this young man who falls in love with the wrong person, gets in trouble as a result of it, gets exiled, then has to travel initially across Europe and then to the New World, and spend some time there, then goes back to Europe again, and then finally hoves up, I think, somewhere in North Africa, and resolves to spend the rest of his life cultivating his garden, as he says. But he's accompanied in these journeys by this professor, Professor Pangloss. And probably the most famous line in Candide belongs to Professor Pangloss, and it describes his philosophy. And it's a philosophy in which he keeps saying that all is for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds. And Voltaire based Pangloss, Professor Pangloss, on the philosopher Leibniz, because Leibniz did seem to hold a philosophy which did kind of resolve to something like that, a philosophy which became known as optimism. Now, when we talk about optimism now, we talk about it as a kind of general happy mindset. But at the time when Voltaire was writing, Leibniz had introduced this term optimism, I think, and it was a rarefied term. It was a philosophical term, it wasn't in common usage. So Voltaire used the word optimism as the subtitle for Candide, actually, and it was a kind of wry piss take of the idea more than anything else. And optimism sums up this idea that this is always for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds, but puts the philosophical underpinnings to that, or Leibniz does. And he's a theological philosophy, so he's coming from that end of it. But he's talking about God makes the world as the being entirely good, makes the world as good as it is possible to make it, using the materials available. So it's optimal, yeah, it's optimal, hence optimism. That this is an optimal world, the best of all possible worlds. And within optimism, you assume that because it's optimal, because it was produced by a divine creator of ultimate good, that all these things which appear to be harms, which appear to be sufferings, appear to be inconveniences, are actually part of a narrative which will play itself out towards the positive, to be optimal. So if you're suffering now, don't worry too much about it, because it'll probably have a happy ending. Or if it doesn't have a happy ending, at least it'll have a position within a narrative which becomes meaningful. So you suffer, so it has purpose, your suffering, or something like it. Maybe not grander purpose and metaphysical and spiritual purpose, but purpose in terms of the story. So that's the idea of that. And of course we find it a little bit silly, and Pangloss is in Candide is presented as a bit of a silly character. We're supposed to think that this is ridiculous. We're supposed to think it's what we would now call, I guess, something like Pollyanna-ish. Pollyanna is a character in a film or a novel, both. And there's a Pollyanna effect is named after it, which is this attitude, this optimistic attitude that most of us have, that we tend to underestimate the negatives and overestimate the positives, because we all have this general view that things will probably work out all right. And if we've suffered in the past, yeah, it was all right, it wasn't as bad as we thought, those kind of things. We're all kind of Pollyanna-ish, we're all Panglossian in that kind of sense, or at least most of us are. Now there is another character in Candide which doesn't play a major part, another philosopher, again based on a real philosopher in the way that Pangloss was based on Leibniz. I can't remember the name, so I'll have to find out. But who has a kind of opposite viewpoint. In the anti-Pangloss, anti-Leibniz philosopher. This is the worst of all possible worlds. All is not for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds. All is for the worst in this, the worst of all possible worlds. Everything turns to shit in this counter-philosophy. The world is ultimately meaningless. The world is pointless. It's empty. It may even be full of darkness and horror. And cast into this veil of tears. We go through the veil of tears, and the best thing is to not be born at all. The second best thing is to die young. It's that kind of an idea. Now that idea, in which coming into existence is a harm, of course finds form in Benatar, the harm of coming into existence, better never to have been born. But again, it is very anti-Panglossian. It is assuming a kind of set of narratives placed on the world. The Pollyanna narrative, the Pollyanna effect, places all the moments of our lives, the feelings that we're having, the physiological feelings, the mentally emotional feelings that we've got, the thoughts we're having, places all those ones within a positive narrative. Pollyanna and Pangloss place these moments in a narrative that ends well and meaningfully. The anti-Pangloss, the anti-Leibniz, the anti-Pollyanna, the Benatar, places all these moments within a narrative of meaninglessness and emptiness and ultimate harm. But they're all placed within narratives. There should be a name for the opposite of the Pollyanna effect. There really should. I'll find out what that philosopher's name was from Candide. Perhaps that's the one. All for the best, in this the best for all possible worlds. I guess the alternative would be to try and deal with this kind of isness stuff, isn't it? The suchness. Suchness. Or something.